It's here, the final stage of the WTRL Zwift Racing League, Stage 8, and it's the countryside tour in Umezi on Mercury Islands for what could be, I think, the greatest stage so far in the Zwift Racing League's history, because this one is all about team tactics potentially. It's about your knowledge of the bikes, of the course, of the game, of your opposition. This plays into everything that is a team sport. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this plays out. Now we're going to break this particular recon into two parts. The first part, as always, we're going to dive into the detail of the course, these preem segments through the countryside sprint and also the temple climb forward. And then we're going to have a little bit more discussion tactically as a team or individuals. What should we be doing? Should we be splitting the team up into different parts? Should we be doing a bike change? We're going to get into all of that detail towards the end of the video. But first of all, let's dive in and take a look at the course. All right, so let's take a look at the course profile. 42 kilometers for the A and B category riders and 27.5 kilometers for C and D riders. Both of these races are going to be finished on top of the Temple KOM, which is a 2.5 kilometer 3.6 average gradient gravelly climb all the way to the finish line. So basically halfway through the second lap at the top of this column, that's where the C and D riders are going to be finished, and halfway through the third lap is where you're going to be finishing the race if you're an A and B rider. Okay, so let's take a look at the opportunities to pick up points in this race. First of all, we've got the country sprint, a short 100-meter sprint on the flat roads just before we get to village Onsen, and then we've got this infamous gravelly climb up the temple climb forward, 2.5 kilometers, as I've said, average gradient of 3.6. It does pick up to about 9 to 10% in places, but as you get to the top, those final couple hundred meters are fairly flat, so something to look at and consider it when you're using your power up towards the end of the race to take those points or to take that victory. In terms of power up, we've got the infamous Steamroller, which is going to play an absolute critical role in this race, I am sure. We've then got the draft to improve your draft, multiple occasions to use that, and we'll take a look at that later on in the video. And then we've got the feather, again, plenty of opportunities to use this on that final climb. The main decision we got to think about here as well is the road bike or gravel bike. Do we have a gravel bike before we start? Do we do a switch? We're going to take a look at that in a bit more detail as we roll on through the video. But let's get on course and have a look at these segments and the course in a bit more detail. All right, so we're going to leave the pens, we're going to take a left, and the great news is we're going to roll through the start finish banner. So the good news is you're going to pick up a power up from the word go, ready for that first countryside sprint segment. In terms of power ups, we've got the anvil, the draft, and the feather, and we'll run through those in a bit more detail as we get on. Okay, in terms of this first section, it's fairly flat, if not a little bit downhill until we get to that first countryside sprint, which is going to start around about the 5 kilometer mark. Again, you'll remember from last time that we have that little bus stop on the right hand side, which I use them as the marker, and then it's a very short sprint, 100-meter sprint, flat out, first across the line, fastest through segment. As always, bear in mind that immediately after this sprint, in particular because we've got this drag up to village Onsen, that some riders may choose to roll over the top or keep the pressure on just to break that front group down. I do not think that will be as dramatic as we've seen previously on the season on this course, because it is a longer race and it is more elevation, more climbing to consider here as well. And bear in mind, not everyone may be on a road bike on this point, so think about picking particular riders on most sprint efficient bikes for this particular segment if you're focused on picking up those fastest through and those first across the line points on this particular sprint. All right, so in terms of the countryside sprint, you're going to hit the first one at the 5 kilometer mark. You're going to hit the second one on lap 2 at 20.9 kilometers, and on the final lap you will hit the sprint at 35.8 kilometers. Approximately, again, it is approximate, it does depend on where you start and which pen you start and so on, but those are the approximate start points for that particular segment. All right, so immediately after the sprint, you're gonna, as I said, roll up through Village Onsen. And then basically, immediately after Village Onsen, the road starts to climb up. Now, this isn't a part of the official climb, but it is quite draggy until we get to the foot of the dirt road. Now, you're gonna reach the foot of this first temple climb at the kilometer 9. All right, so we've rolled through Village Onsen. We've gone this draggy bit of road until we get to the base of the Temple Com. Now, on lap 1, you're gonna hit the bottom of Temple Com at kilometer 9. Now, this is the point immediately where you turn left onto this gravel road that if you're considering a bike change, whether it be on this lap or maybe the final lap, dependent on the size of your group, where I will be looking at doing a bike change. And again, we'll have a look at how we do a bike change in a bit more detail towards the end of the video. But in terms of hitting the foot of this climb, again, lap 1, kilometer 9, lap 2, it's kilometer 24.8, and at lap 3, the final lap, you're gonna hit the bottom of this climb at 39.5 kilometers. And remember, this climb is 2.5 kilometers long. So as I said, we can see the Temple Com here, 2.5 kilometers long, an average gradient of 3.6, combination of gravel, some boardwalk sections, but absolutely the gravel bike is the fastest on this climb. So as I said, it's at the foot of this climb. If you're thinking about doing a bike change, that's the place to do it, whether that be on the first lap or the final lap, just to contest that finish is also something to consider. We'll look at that in a bit more detail. But it's the top of this climb that we need to take a look at in a bit more detail. So let's go ahead and have a look at the top of the Temple climb forward. All right, so just looking at the top of this Temple Com in a bit more detail, with about 400 meters to go, it does ramp up just a little bit. So this might be an opportunity here to utilize the feather. But what you don't want to be doing is saving it for the final 200 to 300 meters, because the final 200 to 300 meters are pan flat pretty much all the way to the line. So again, if you're going for those first across the line, or indeed those finish line points at the end of the race, just bear in mind those little changes in elevation which may affect your power up choice right at the end of the race. All right, so in terms of descending off the Temple Com, what we saw actually from some of the Zwift insider testing, in terms of descent times for road bike, mountain bike or gravel bike, there was very little difference, I think 2 to 3 seconds. And again, the gradient does change quite a bit going down this road. There isn't anywhere, any opportunity that I can see, once you've gone over the top, all the way into the finish line now for the rest of the course, to change bikes back, if that makes sense. Once you've done that change at the foot, I would say you've pretty much got to stick with that if you want to stick with the front group or in the group that you're in currently for the remainder of the race or the remainder of the lap at least. But as I said, there are sections dependent on the size of your group here to maybe super tuck down this descent. If the group's big enough and the pace is high in some of the higher category races, there are some opportunities to super tuck down here, but they're not too many. So just try and take that recovery whenever you see that gradient more than 3% or a minus 3% and the speed above 57 kilometers per hour. All right, so once you've turned back onto the road after that descent, we're going to go through the market town here before we head back down, and it is a descent all the way through that start finish banner where you'll pick up another power up ready to start lap 2 or lap 3. All right, so in terms of power up, again, fantastic, because there are 3 opportunities to pick up power ups on this course. Of course, you've got the start finish banner, which you're going to go through right at the start of the race, and then at the end of lap 1 and the end of lap 2 also. You've then got the countryside sprint, another power up to pick up there, and then you've got the top of the Temple Com where you will pick another power up as well. So plenty of power up opportunities, so utilize them well, utilize them always, as I would say, throughout this stage, and have fun with them. All right, so in terms of the power-ups available, we have the infamous Steamroller. It is back, and I think it is going to play such a critical part in this race. It's a 30-second power-up, which in itself is significant, but essentially it reduces the rolling resistance of the gravel surface that we're going to encounter on the Temple Com for those points positions, but also the finish line as well. So look out for this one. It's going to be pretty critical. Utilize it well on those boardwalks, on that gravel, and hopefully you can utilize it to pick up those maximum points. anvil. You've then got the draft. Again, a number of occasions you can use this throughout the whole race, either through the countryside sprint, trying to hold on after the sprint, or maybe that final couple hundred meters of the race, or the temple con, which is basically a little sprint section on a flat bit of gravel as we go through that mystical tree. And then we've got the feather as well, which will be utilized on that climb, I think, quite effectively by a lot of riders. Again, just be cautious about utilizing that for the final couple hundred meters on that climb, because it does flatten off there just towards the finish line. All right, so in terms of bike choice, there is so much discussion and chat and things to consider on this, and we've already been having a lot of chat amongst our own Facebook group on the WTRL Facebook page, which is fantastic, and within my own team's Discord channel at the same time. I've also spoken to quite a few of the top racers in the community. I've also spoken to Eric and Zwift Insider, and what I can say is there is not a consensus in terms of bike choice. Where there is consensus is that we need to remember that this is a team sport, it's a team game, which is why we love the Zwift Racing League. So maybe that leads us to think we should have different riders on different setups for different focuses within this race, which, let's face it, is the way that the best teams within the Zwift Racing League have been maximising points and getting themselves to the top of their division so far this season, and in fact every season we've had so far this year. So that is something to consider. Do you have riders specifically on gravel bikes to focus on the fastest through segments on that temple climb? Leave that one for discussion. And the same, do we have riders on aero bikes just to focus on that sprint? And then what on earth do we do with the riders that we want to focus on those finish line points? Do we put them as a bike change at the foot of the temple con? And then again, do they do that on the first lap? Do they do that every lap? Or do they do it just on the final lap? Personally, I think that needs to be done on the final lap if you're going to make a change, because I do not think there's any particular point on this course where you could change your bike back. If you've been on an aero bike at the start and then you switch to gravel on the foot of the temple con, I do not see anywhere where you can change back. So once you've gone to a gravel bike, I think you're on a gravel bike if you want to be in that front group. All right, so in terms of the bike choice, let's have a look at the numbers in a bit more detail. And this is an article that I found on the Zwift Insider. So although this is focused on Kappa Quest, I think this crosses over really well with the Countryside Tour, despite there being slightly more tarmac on the Countryside Tour than there is on Kappa Quest. All right, so this is looking at the concept bike versus the gravel bike, the Canyon Grail, and the Trek Super Caliber mountain bike. For me, this discounts on this particular course the mountain bike. So if we look at the climb first of all, you've got the concept bike here, the Tron bike, 7.36, 7 minutes 36 seconds versus the gravel bike at 7 minutes 10. The mountain bike, although goes better on gravel, is heavier, which is why it's slower than the gravel bike in this case. In terms of the descent, as I've said, there's very little difference here, 4 seconds in total difference between the quickest mountain bike descending, again it's heavier, it's going to descend better, versus the concept Tron bike. And then we can ignore forest and look at the tarmac sections here as well. And for me, I don't think there's a bigger difference as I expected to see between the gravel bike and the Tron bike here. So we're looking at what, 26 or 16 seconds total slower with the gravel bike versus the Tron. So I'm now asking myself the question, could I draft around these tarmac sections and survive that sprint and that section after the sprint on a gravel bike to stay with that front group to either push on or have an easier ride going up that temple con? That's my personal way of looking at this particular one. You may have a slightly different view. Again, let's have this discussion down below in the description, or drop us a message through the WTRL Facebook. It would be great to have these discussions and see what we're thinking about in terms of individual or team tactics. All right, what about changing bikes, I hear you ask, and there's been a lot of discussion also about this. Now, in terms of changing bikes, at the foot of the con is an ideal section. As you turn left, you hit that gravel road, you can either slow down pretty quickly, or again, if you jump into that pairing screen, you should stop pretty quickly. You could do a bike change. I think 15 seconds is what you're looking at really for a good bike change there as well. So again, this for me is why it makes this so fun, because like racing on the real roads where you've got to make decisions on the fly and on the go and mid-race depending on what's happening, The same thing is going to happen in ZRL. I'm going to make a decision based on the size of my group, the riders around me, the gaps behind me, the gaps in front, whether I'm going to be able to make a bike change at this particular point. So some decisions in your team might be set in stone. Some, with some riders, you might say you've got to make a decision on the fly, depending on who's around you and how big that group is around you. But if you're going to make a bike change, it's about 15 seconds. The problem with the bike change is you can change from a road to gravel at the foot of the comp. The difficulty is I do not see an opportunity where you can change back. So if you do make that change, bear in mind that I think you're then stuck on that bike until you get to this point again. Now that might mean that you only make a change on the final lap. Maybe you've got a small group and again you're on the foot of the climb, you're on your aero bike, you want the best advantage for the final segment. You might decide to try and get a little bit of a gap to give yourself a little bit of time to make that bike change before that final ascent of the temple climb forward. That is something to consider. But again, I think it's only the last lap realistically where you can think about making that change, and it does depend on the group around you. All right, so I'm going to leave a couple of links below. First of all, I'll leave a link to this page, which will give you the times and look the difference between the gravel bike versus the Tron in this case, on the gravel section, on the climb, and of course the road sections. And then I'm going to leave a link also to the pages which should help you with bike changing, and depending on what technology you're using, what hardware you're using, how to do the quickest bike change possible. I use a gaming PC here, so I'm utilizing keyboard, so I will then go into the pairing screen, the garage, change bikes, straight back onto the road. I think I can get this to somewhere between 10 or 15 seconds with a bit of Formula One practice beforehand. Practice makes perfect, and I can see plenty of people making this practice throughout the recon rides. In terms of recon rides, as always, there are plenty to choose from. My choice would be the Racing Without Borders or the Team Electric Spirit events, which both take place the Saturday before the Tuesday of the ZRL race, and again I will also try and jump on one of those this week at the same time. All right, before we finish this recon, I just want to say a massive thank you to you, the community, and there are a couple of other people I want to say thank you to as well. But thank you for the community, for watching these videos, for subscribing to the channel and sharing this content with your teammates and your broader team. It really is appreciated. And we've seen the Bradeley community this time grow from around about 700 subscribers, I think, to like just over 1,500 subscribers now, so I really appreciate that. There are lots of other people in the community as well. I'd like to thank Steve as well, Steve Troymans, one of my Belgium teammates. He helps a lot with the recon as well and does a lot of the pre-event riding for me at the same time and gives some really insightful information that I can share with you on these recons. Eric at Zwift Insider, also we communicate pretty frequently as well, and Eric is really useful in providing those insights in terms of bikes, the course details, the course distances and so on. It's also fantastic to have Eric's input into these recons. And finally, a big thank you to Sherpa Dave. Not many people know that myself and Sherpa Dave, we communicate very, very frequently, and there's been a number of occasions this year where we've messaged each other throughout the season just to make sure we've both got the correct information from the WTRL and Zwift in some cases. Classic example is when we raced in France around Caspats this time. We talked quite frequently about where we thought the points were available, where we thought the finish line was going to be for C or D. Turns out it was where nobody thought it was going to be apart from someone at Zwift. But a massive thank you for Sherpa Dave as well, and keep up the great work with your time trialing recons throughout the rest of the year. So again, thank you for watching. Please keep subscribing and following the channel and sharing the channel. It is much appreciated. It really helps it out. Again, throughout the winter, I've got more Zwift content coming. We're going to be looking at some other races throughout the year as well. And also, I am going to continue my riding outside. The cyclocross season is kicking off here in Europe, so I'm going to be doing a lot of cyclocross as soon as I can shift this cold completely and I can get out there in the wonderful British rain. So have great fun on this final stage, guys. I think it is a great stage to finish off this season. It's not one for the purist road riders, but if you're into cycling in general, you're into gaming, I think this plays and ticks every boot that we want as a e-racing community. So hats off to Zwift and the WTRL for picking this fantastic stage to finish off the season. Have a great week. I'll see you in Mercury Islands on Tuesday.